Match day 2 of the 2025-26 Euroleague. We kick off with Partizan's victory over Milan. Partizan's starting lineup was Jones, Milton, Bonga, Brown and Jones. The game was very balanced, with high percentages. Brown stood out with 20 points and Jones with 15. For Milan, the starting lineup was Bolmaro, Lede, Guduric, Shields and Nebo. They also had high percentages, but many turnovers. Shields stood out with 21 points and Guduric with 12 points and 8 assists. Let's start with Bayern's victory over Crvena Zvezda. For Bayern, the starting five was Lucic, Obst, Jovic, Mike and Rathan Mays. They had a balanced shooting schedule and great two-point percentages, with Obst standing out with 31 points and 9 three-pointers, and De Silva with 100% shooting from two. For Crvena Zvezda, the starting five was Miller, McIntyre, Carter, Kalinic, Moneke and Nwora. They had a balanced shooting schedule with good percentages, although they had many turnovers. Nwora stood out with 27 points while drawing as many as 7 fouls. Let's continue with Real Madrid's victory over Olympiacos. With a 25-8 run in the final quarter, Madrid secured its first victory. Madrid's starting lineup was Campazzo, Deck, Hezonja, Lyles and Tavares. The shooting pattern was balanced. Hezonja stood out with 18 points and Deck with 13. Kramer also played great defense in the comeback. For Olympiacos, the starting lineup was Walkup, Vezenkov, Dorsey, Milutinov and Fournier. Their three-point percentages were poor. Vezenkov stood out with 16 points and 9 rebounds, although his percentages were poor, and Dorsey with 20 points. Fournier had 14 points but 5 turnovers. Let's start with Zalgiris's victory over Fenerbahce. For Zalgiris, the starting lineup was Williams-Goss, Francisco, Wright, Tubelis and Ula Novas. The shooting pattern was balanced. Williams-Goss stood out with 20 points and Francisco with 18. For Fenerbahce, the starting lineup was Baldwin IV, Melli, Horton-Tucker, Yantunen and Hall. The shooting pattern was balanced, but the three-point percentage was very poor. Baldwin stood out with 36 points. Let's start with Monaco's victory over Dubai. Monaco's starting lineup was James, Mirotic, Okabo, Diallo and Strazel. Their shooting was balanced with very good percentages. Mirotic stood out with 19 points and 7 rebounds, and James with 14 points and 8 assists. For Dubai, the starting lineup was Bacon, Musa, Wright, Petrosev and Kabengele. Their three-point percentages were very poor, and they made a lot of turnovers. Petrosev stood out with 14 points and 8 rebounds. Bertans and Musa had a rough day. Let's start with Hapoel's victory over Efes, which saw a great comeback in the second quarter. Efes's starting lineup was Larkin, Lloyd, Vailabab, Cordinier and Osmani. Their shooting was balanced, but their percentages from the three-point lineup were poor. Lloyd stood out with 25 points and Osmani with 16 points and 7 rebounds. For Hapoel, the starting lineup was Bryant, Malcolm, Micic, Wainwright and Oturu. Their shooting was balanced, with Oturu standing out with 12 points and 9 rebounds, and Micic with 9 points, 6 assists and 5 rebounds. Let's start with Asvel's victory over Baskonia. For Asvel, the starting five was Selios, Ajinka, Vautier, Lighty and Njai. Their shooting percentages were strong. Selios and Njai stood out with 23 points. Baskonia also had good percentages, with more three-pointers than two-pointers. The starting five was Howard, Diallo, Sedekerskis, Luwawu Cavaro and Forrest. Forrest stood out with 11 points, 6 assists and 8 rebounds. Sedekerskis with 11 points and 7 rebounds, and Diallo with 13 points and 8 rebounds. Let's continue with Barca's great victory over Panathinaikos. For Panathinaikos, the starting lineup was Sloukas, Grant, Nunn, Juancho and Mitoglu. Low percentages and a lot of foul trouble. Sloukas stood out with 18 points and 11 assists. although they were terrible percentages, and Juancho with 27 points and 8 rebounds. For Barca, the starting lineup was Punta, Lapro, Clyburn, Shengelia and Willie. They had good percentages with many three-pointers, although they also had many turnovers. Clyburn stood out with 23 points and Lapro with 15 points and 9 assists. Let's start with Valencia's victory over Virtus. Valencia continued its spectacular form with another victory. The starting five was Pradilla, De La Rey, Moore, Taylor and Thompson. They had good percentages with plenty of three-pointers and great rebounding control, although they had many turnovers. Larrea stood out with 23 points and Moore with 12 points and 6 assists. For Virtus, the starting five was Edwards, Pajola, Alston, Morgan and Jallo. They had low percentages and plenty of turnovers. Morgan stood out with 24 points. Let's start with Paris's victory over Maccabi. Maccabi's starting lineup was Clark, Horde, Walker, Downton Jr. and Leaf. Poor percentages and many turnovers. Horde stood out with 15 points. Paris's starting lineup was Hi-Fi, DeCossi, Morgan, Ouattara and Herrera. Great rebounding dominance. Poor three-point shooting and many turnovers. DeCossi stood out with 9 points and 13 rebounds and Hi-Fi with 21 points.